the 6th chapter.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Jesus said, "I am the living bread that came down from heaven. Whoever eats of this bread will live forever, and the bread that I will give for the life of the world is my flesh." The Jews then disputed among themselves, saying, "How can this man give us his flesh to eat?" So Jesus said to them, "Very truly I tell you, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life in you. Those who eat my flesh and drink my blood have eternal life, and I will raise them up on the last day. For my flesh is true food, and my blood is true drink. Those who eat my flesh and drink my blood abide in me, and I in them. Just as the living Father sent me, and I live because of the Father, so whoever eats me will live because of me. This is the bread that came down from heaven, not like that which your ancestors ate, and they died. But the one who eats this bread will live forever." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
When I was a boy, I was shaped by a daily ritual. A daily ritual. I learned to read from the age of probably 4 or 5 or 6 by turning to the back page of the Chicago sports pages. I would wake up at 5 or 5:30 in the morning, come down every day, get a bowl of cereal, and turn to the only page in the paper that would make sense to me with its digested information. I would check the standings to see where the Chicago Cubs were. And as you indicate, this was an oftentimes dispiriting or discouraging way to begin my day. But this was my ritual. It was how I learned to read, and I would pair these standings with a little corner on the other side of the paper or the page, the transactions page. Up until the end of July, the trading deadline would come, I'd get the bad news from the previous day's results, but this distant hope, a transaction. We could make a trade, there could be a transaction that would turn things around. This distant hope. Now, I don't want to make too big a deal of this ritual, and I'm by no means a child psychologist or anything, but I have to think that there was something about this ritual that perhaps we've all encountered. This might extend to all of us as we get later in life. A sense of some longing, some discontent, something that's not quite right in our lives, and then this notion of a transaction, that there's some quick fix out there. There's something just around the corner where we might not have to work that hard. We might get our life back on track very simply or very easily. Now, if you've ever found yourself in that sort of way of thinking, this sort of transactional, day-to-day mindset, you have good company in Jesus' conversation partners this morning in our gospel reading from John. They are people who are discouraged and they're living very transactional lives. You'll recall now that we're in our fourth Sunday of reading and learning about bread. And this whole saga began with Jesus performing this amazing transaction where all that the disciples brought was a couple of loaves and fish, and they were multiplied and transacted into this glorious feast. And Jesus has some attention because he is seen as someone who can produce, who has given them a good transaction. And as he goes on in his sermon, in his talk, he talks about having come down from heaven
So maybe these listeners are thinking he'll be an especially long-lasting or generous giver. But they're still living these transactional lives, seeing what they can get from Jesus. Yet now, in this moment, Jesus sort of raises the stakes or ups the ante when he says to his listeners that they are to eat his flesh and they will live forever. To eat his flesh and live forever. For us, for them who live transactional day-to-day lives, this seems very permanent. This is more intimate than we are used to behaving. We will live forever. And so as we consider these words of Jesus, we think in our own lives of our deep inner longings. We ponder or wonder, are we living sort of day-to-day transactional lives? Or is there something larger, some broader perspective, some broader, deeper healing that we long for? We consider these puzzling words of Jesus, eat my flesh and live forever. We consider whether it's something that we might want to do. Consider what this life could entail. Now, before we can fully appreciate or consider Jesus' words, it may serve us well to think or consider just how deeply we've gotten into some of these transactional or hopeless patterns. In other words, how strong or jarring a departure will it be for us to eat this flesh, to enter into this peaceful, eternal life? For some of us may recall a time in our past, in our childhood perhaps, a time of relative innocence or peace. But we came to see that as life went on and grew more complicated, that we perhaps were not treated or raised properly, and carrying some baggage from our family, carrying some baggage from our upbringing. And so we can no longer have this broad perspective that all is well. When we come to this day-to-day, we're in survival mode. Or we've been hurt by a loved one, or a loved one has died, and so we're understandably skittish. We're just trying to make it from day to day. We no longer are afforded the luxury of thinking about this eternal, long-lasting peace that Jesus seems to be describing. We're insecure, always on guard, just trying to make it through the day-to-day. And I take it that that's how Jesus' listeners are hearing this. They're God's people, Israel. They've had sort of a long, mixed relationship. They've had great moments. They had this memory, as humans, they had this memory of the Garden of Eden when everything was right in the world. But they've been following God unevenly. They live now in a world of law and survival. And in fact, part of what makes them so appalled when they hear these words about eating Jesus' flesh is they think of their Levitical and Deuteronomic law telling them that they must be very careful about how they treat bodies, how they treat the dead. And so, insecure or wanting to stay in that relationship with God, they're abhorred by this notion as we are of eating the flesh. They're just trying to make it through the day-to-day. What can we do today to survive? And so I take it that we, like them, live much of our lives in this survival mode. When Jesus says he offers us something long-lasting and eternal, we may be skeptical, not quite know what he means. And yet, we hunger for it. We long for this eternal peace. We long for this hunger to be quenched, or this hunger to be filled, this thirst to be quenched. And yet we know that it's going to take something big, something powerful, to get us out of our day-to-day, transactional, survival mode lives. But this morning, Jesus meets us and comes to us as the God who doesn't do anything in survival mode, doesn't do anything transactional or impermanent or halfway, but meets us fully and in the flesh. When God begins something, creating us and sending us into the world, God, it seems, has done so with a full plan for our provision, a full plan to protect and provide for and nourish us. And so God, seeing his people struggling, trying to make it through the day of their lives, puts on flesh, puts on human flesh, and comes down and meets us in our moments of transaction and survival. Jesus comes down and meets us in our lives. Now, so strong are these powers of transaction and insecurity that Jesus will meet trouble in the world. And he'll be opposed by people who cannot fathom a God so big and so loving that he would come and join us. And while Jesus is killed, if he lived in the transactional, day-to-day survival mode that we are afraid of, his death would be a great defeat, a moment where we lament that we've put our hope in some greater future. But because God's plans and love for us are so complete, so all-encompassing, so beyond anything that our transactional minds can fathom, God raises Jesus from the dead and sends him to us even through bread and wine to feed us, to remind us that no transaction, no slight momentary loss will have power over us in God's grand scheme. This true blood, Jesus says, this true food will make him abide in us. Where we go, he will go, and where we stay, he will stay. Forever. Not temporary and not in any transaction, but the one who eats will live forever. That is the good news present in Jesus' gospel for us this morning. It's the good news that will meet us in a few moments in this true food, this true drink. Now, as we prepare and await this presence, this food, we might have one more thing to consider. To prepare ourselves to receive this abundance from God. And that is to think to ourselves in our own lives, to what extent have we made that change? To what extent have we made that change from seeing our lives as disjointed, occasional efforts at survival, to being part of this grand story of God's love for us and for the world that we get to participate in. This grand story. This question or challenge may come to us as a congregation at a particularly opportune moment, for this is a time at Zion of a lot of change, a lot of, you could say, transactions, lots of money going back and forth as far as building improvements, organs, a still unfinished education wing, new staff coming on board, even with another congregational vote next week. And we would be understood or forgiven for thinking these are making some transactions and investments in our future. Transactions that will be quick improvements. And while, of course, to some extent that is true, I take it that we're drawn back to this table, to this true food and true drink for our source of life. That is, when God calls us and we're invited forward, we'll come forward as equals. Not that God in this meal is more present or less present in any one of us according to our title, the amount of money that we can put in the offering plate, our age, how long we've been a member of this congregation. But these gifts of God for all that unite us in this one body. So we think and marvel and rejoice at the fact that this diverse group of people with their own lives, challenges, and struggles are brought together in God's love, brought together in this true food. We'll sing in a moment in our hymn of the day these words, "Taste and see the Lord is good." It'll be true as we sing it for each of us equally, no matter our status. Taste and see the Lord is good. Taste and see the love that God has for the world. Taste and see its power and strength. In Jesus' name, amen.